Arsenal are back in the Champions League. I've got plenty of friends that are Arsenal fans, and honestly, the only thing they care about this season is we're back in a big time. We're back in a Champions League. Their group has just come through. They're Sevilla, masters of the Europa League, PSV, and Lens. That is not a bad group when you've been waiting years for getting back in the Champions League.
I think, on first looks, the Arsenal fans and the football club in general will be really happy with that group. It's got no real big hitters, like you say. It's got Sevilla in, but as far as PSV and Lens are concerned, Arsenal will definitely fancy their chances against all three. In fairness,
it's a very nice group to come back to. PSV obviously just battered Rangers, but then Lens are brand new to the Champions League, haven't been in it for a very long time, if I'm not wrong. And Sevilla, as we know, they want to be in the Europa League. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. So you'd back Arsenal to finish top, you'd imagine, and then you're thinking, well, how far can they actually go?
Yeah, but the problem with Arsenal is that in European competitions, this is Europa League included, they've got a great record of getting out their group, but then beyond that, they struggle to go deep in the competitions. In Europa League, if you look at the last 3 seasons, round of 16 last year, semi-finals the year before, and the round of 32 in 2019-20. For an Arsenal team that litters with quality, you expect them to do a lot better in that competition, if not win it. And then you go to a Champions League record, and they haven't made the semi-finals of the Champions League since 2009. And that's a long, long time. That's Wenger era Arsenal. That's an Arsenal that contained players like Cesc Fabregas. It's a lifetime ago, really. And so I back Arsenal to get out of this group based on the names that you see in it. But in terms of progressing deep into this competition, Arsenal are going to have to show something that they previously and historically haven't shown.
In terms of the people in the team, in their group, Lens were in the Champions League for the first time in 02-03. 2 wins, 2 draws, 2 losses. Sevilla, obviously, we've seen in recent years, and then PSV always come in and out of the Champions League. Arsenal will want to go as far as they can. Of course, their knockout form, or record, should I say, hasn't been great, but that was always under Arsene Wenger. Arteta and Arsenal playing knockout football actually seems like quite a nice fit. I don't think they were particularly brilliant in the Europa League, but he rotated it quite a bit.
Yeah, he did. He was obviously fighting deep on both fronts with the Premier League and leading that race. So I think that probably played into his decision making. But listen, you can only beat what's put in front of you, and they will definitely look at that group and think that they're the biggest and the best club in it, and they'll expect to go through either first or second. I imagine they'd want to like to go through first, but for me, it's a really kind draw. He hasn't got a big hitter in.
Yeah, what I would also say as well, me and you've talked about this ad nauseum, is that where Arsenal's kind of title race went askew or went awry last season was where they rotated players against that game against Man City in the FA Cup. I think Arsenal having meaningful games on Wednesdays and Saturdays means that it will continually be in the rhythm, and because they're so excited about being back in the Champions League, of course they're going to rotate, but they're going to play very strong sides. And you see the group, you expect them to beat those teams in the group. So consistently winning during the week will take confidence into the weekend and might even help them in the Premier League because they're in that rotation of winning games consistently. So despite the fact that it's going to be taxing on their squad and they've already had a few injuries, I think that Arsenal being in the Champions League will serve them well in the Premier League.
The worry, I think, for Arsenal fans potentially could be if they go deep in the Champions League, they want to win the league title, they naturally want to go from second to first. It's a very difficult thing to balance. Obviously, they've added more depth to their squad, but naturally, if you take out Odegaard and you bring in Fabio Vieira, regardless of how good Vieira has looked so far this season, it's a big drop off in quality. If you're losing Saliba and you're bringing in Rob Holding, we know the effects that had last season, and Arsenal fans, yes, I know, you're bashing that keyboard now. I apologise. And then up front, Gabriel Jesus to Eddie Nketiah. Would you be worried that maybe they should just concentrate on the league?
I don't think you can make that call now. I think that's a call you've got to make when you're in the midst of well, first and foremost, if they get out of the group and if they get into the knockout phases, then that's the call you make. You assess where you're at in the Premier League, you assess who you're up against in the Champions League. But I think when you take a step back and you look at what Arteta's done, and he's been heavily criticised for already, this tinkering early on in the season, this is what he's doing it for these midweek games when you need all your squad in, you need your big players and you need big performances week in, week out, 3 times a week sometimes, and you throw in the travel with that as well. It can be really taxing on a group. And that is why ultimately he's trying to find different ways to win and not just the the really successful but regimented one he did last year.
I do also hate the idea of the goal that people made out that the top four is a trophy now. So when the goal is to finish in the top four and then you get into the season, it's like, oh, should we rest players in that competition? It just seems pointless to me. I feel like Arsenal need to go for the Champions League. They've never won it. I think they're probably, in terms of the mega powers, in terms of world football, probably the only huge club in world football that have never won the European Cup.
Here's a question. Put your Arsenal hats on here, neither of you are Arsenal fans. If I offered you the Champions League or the Premier League to win, what do you think you would take?
Wait, not as an Arsenal fan.
Not as an Arsenal fan.
I think these days the Premier League is harder to win. I think if you look at the Champions League last season, you saw AC Milan and Inter Milan in the semi-finals of that competition. It's a cup competition. Whereas the Premier League, you have to overcome Pep Guardiola, who's arguably the greatest manager of all time, managing one of the greatest teams of all time that we've seen.
It's a tough one because the Premier League's the one that you play and train week in, week out for. It's relentless. It's the best league in the world. But the glamour of the Champions League is something to be had. And I can't help but feel Arsenal. If an Arsenal fan was sat here right now, I think he'd be saying Champions League.
You reckon? I do wonder.
I'll ask you. When Liverpool won the Champions League and when Liverpool won the Premier League, the Premier League felt more significant.
But that's different.
Yeah, like Liverpool hadn't won the Premier League for 30 years, whereas Liverpool have almost routinely been involved in Champions Leagues towards the latter stages. If I was an Arsenal fan, I think they're desperate to win the Premier League.
Yeah.
Of course.
Well, the hole in the walls there is for the Premier League, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which play did he show round?
That was... I can't remember.
It was Edu, wasn't it? Edu was showing the play around.
Yeah.
It was Timber. And there was a blank space for the Premier League.
Yeah,
so that is maybe internally the one they want, but I think the glamour of the Champions League would win over the fans.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for watching ESPN on YouTube. And for more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for premium content and live streaming, subscribe to ESPN Plus.